Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters. There comes a point in life when you realize something important. Life itself has not defeated you, but the way you have been carrying it has exhausted your heart. You wake up, you move forward, you try to stay patient, yet inside the heart feels heavy, restless, and quietly burdened. Not because you are weak, not because you lack faith, but because the heart was never meant to carry everything alone. Stay with me, my dear brothers and sisters, because this reminder may not change what is happening around you, but it can change how your heart walks through life. And that changes everything. Why the heart feels so heavy today. Many people walk through life believing that tiredness only comes from physical effort. Yet in reality, the deepest exhaustion settles in the heart long before it ever reaches the body, because the heart is constantly processing worry, fear, expectation, disappointment, and responsibility all at once without rest. In today's world, we are surrounded by noise, urgency, and constant comparison, and even when life seems outwardly stable, the heart quietly absorbs pressure from every direction, pressure to succeed, pressure to keep up, pressure to appear strong, and pressure to hide weakness. And over time, this unseen burden begins to weigh heavily. What makes this heaviness even more difficult is that many people do not understand where it comes from, because they look at their lives and see that they are doing what they are supposed to do, fulfilling responsibilities, avoiding obvious mistake, and trying their best, yet the heart still feels unsettled and drained. This is because the heart was never created to live in a constant state of self-reliance, constantly calculating outcomes and fearing loss. Because when trust is replaced by control, peace slowly slips away, even if nothing visibly goes wrong. The heart begins to struggle not when problems increase, but when it forgets where support truly comes from. And without that anchor, every delay feels personal, every test feels unfair, and every uncertainty feels threatening, even though none of these were meant to break the heart. Understanding this is the first step toward relief, because when a person realizes that heaviness does not always mean failure, weakness, or distance, but often means the heart is carrying more than it was designed to carry alone, the door to change quietly begins to open. The misunderstanding that steals peace from the heart. One of the greatest misunderstandings people carry through life is the belief that peace is something that comes later, something that arrives after problems are solved, after situations improve, after people change, and after answers finally appear. And because of this belief, the heart keeps postponing rest, thinking that calm is only allowed once everything is fixed. This way of thinking quietly exhausts the heart, because it teaches the heart to live in a constant state of waiting for ease, waiting for clarity, waiting for relief. And while waiting itself is not wrong, living without peace until waiting ends slowly drains emotional strength. Many people wake up each day telling themselves that once this phase passes, once this test ends, once this difficulty is removed, then they will feel calm again. Yet days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months. And the heart remains restless because it was never taught how to remain steady while life is unfolding. The heart begins to associate peace with outcomes instead of reliance. And when peace is tied to outcomes, it becomes fragile, easily shaken by delays, disappointment, and uncertainty, because outcomes by their very nature are unpredictable and often beyond human control. Faith, however, teaches something far more stable and far more merciful, which is that peace was never meant to be a reward given only at the end of hardship, but a companion given to the heart during hardship, so that the heart does not break while it waits. When a person believes that they must first understand everything before they can feel calm, they unknowingly place an impossible burden on the heart, because life rarely explains itself in advance, and clarity often arrives only after patience has already been tested. This is why so many people say they believe, they pray, and they try to trust, yet they still feel anxious, because deep inside they are still waiting for certainty before allowing the heart to settle, and certainty is something life rarely offers in full. The heart was not created to survive on certainty, but on trust. And when trust is replaced with constant analysis, comparison, and fear of future outcomes, peace slowly disappears. Even if faith is present in words, Another misunderstanding that steals peace is the belief that strong people do not struggle emotionally, and because of this belief, many hearts suffer silently, hiding their worries, suppressing their fears, and convincing themselves that feeling overwhelmed means they are failing in faith. In reality, emotional struggle is not a sign of weak belief, but often a sign of a heart that cares deeply, feels deeply, and is trying to carry responsibility with sincerity and without proper grounding. That sincerity turns into exhaustion. The heart begins to feel heavy, not because it lacks faith, but because it lacks permission to rest. Because it has been taught that rest comes only after results, only after success, and only after control is achieved. This misunderstanding creates a constant inner tension, where the heart is always bracing itself for the next challenge, the next disappointment, or the next test, never fully present, never fully calm, and never fully at ease. Faith does not ask the heart to ignore reality or avoid effort, but it does ask the heart to remember that effort does not mean ownership of results, and that distinction alone removes a great weight from the soul. When the heart understands that it is responsible for sincerity and action, but not for outcomes and timing, it begins to breathe again, because it realizes that it was never meant to carry tomorrow before it arrives. Many people replay past mistakes in their minds, believing that peace will come once they fully understand what went wrong. Yet this too keeps the heart trapped, because reflection is healthy, but living in regret keeps the heart anchored to pain instead of growth. Faith teaches the heart to learn from the past without living inside it, to prepare for the future without fearing it, and to remain present without being overwhelmed by what is beyond its reach. Another subtle misunderstanding is believing that patience means emotional numbness. And because of this, people suppress their feelings instead of guiding them, thinking that acknowledging pain somehow contradicts trust, when in reality, honesty with the heart is often the first step toward healing. The heart does not need denial to survive hardship, it needs direction. And direction comes when the heart knows where to turn with its worries instead of carrying them alone. When peace is misunderstood as the absence of problems, the heart becomes discouraged every time a new test appears, interpreting difficulty as failure rather than as a natural part of life's rhythm. Faith reframes this entirely by teaching that tests are not interruptions to life, but part of its design. And when the heart accepts this, it stops resisting reality and starts moving through it with greater balance. A heart that is constantly resisting what it cannot control becomes tense, reactive, and easily overwhelmed, while a heart that accepts uncertainty as part of life becomes calmer, more patient, and more resilient, even when facing the same challenges. This does not mean the heart becomes passive or careless, but rather it becomes grounded, understanding that control belongs where it always has, and that surrender is not weakness, but wisdom. Many people confuse surrender with giving up, yet surrender in faith means releasing the illusion of control while continuing to strive sincerely, and this balance is what brings emotional stability. When this misunderstanding is corrected, the heart begins to experience peace in moments where it previously felt panic, calm in moments where it previously felt frustration, and hope in moments where it previously felt despair. Peace no longer waits at the finish line, but walks alongside the heart through every stage of the journey, reminding it that it is supported even when answers are delayed. This shift does not remove pain, but it removes loneliness from pain, and that alone changes how heavy life feels. When the heart understands that it does not need to earn peace by fixing everything, but receives peace by trusting while doing its best, the entire experience of life begins to change quietly, deeply, and meaningfully. This is why correcting how we understand peace is not a small adjustment, but a fundamental transformation, because a heart that understands peace correctly no longer collapses under uncertainty, but learns how to remain steady while life continues to unfold. And once the heart learns this, it becomes capable of carrying life with dignity, patience, and calm, even when the road ahead is not fully visible. the turning point that quietly changes everything. There comes a moment in a person's life, often unnoticed and unannounced, when the heart begins to realize that continuing to live the same way will only produce the same exhaustion, and that something inside must change, not necessarily in circumstances, but in understanding. This turning point does not arrive with dramatic events or sudden clarity, but with a quiet awareness that the heart has been trying to carry responsibilities, fears, and expectations in a way it was never designed to, and that this approach, no matter how sincere, cannot continue without causing harm. Many people reach this moment after they have tried everything they know how to try, after they have remained patient, made effort, avoided obvious mistakes, and still found themselves feeling unsettled. And it is here that the heart begins to ask a deeper question. Not, why is this happening to me, but what am I meant to learn from this? This question alone marks a shift from resistance to reflection, from frustration to understanding, and from carrying life blindly to carrying it with awareness. Because when the heart stops fighting reality, it finally creates space to receive guidance. Faith teaches us that guidance often arrives after humility, not after force, and that the heart must first admit its limits before it can experience relief, because relief does not enter a heart that insists on control, but one that is willing to trust. At this stage, the heart begins to understand that effort and trust are not opposites but partners, that striving does not mean anxiety, and that reliance does not mean passivity, and this balance is what brings emotional stability. When a person continues to work sincerely while releasing the burden of outcomes, the heart experiences a new kind of strength, a strength that is calm rather than tense, focused rather than frantic, and hopeful rather than fearful. This is where many people misunderstand faith, believing that trusting means doing less, when in reality, trusting means doing what is required without being consumed by what is beyond one's control. And this understanding alone removes a tremendous weight from the heart. As this perspective settles, reactions begin to soften naturally, anger takes longer to rise, patience becomes more accessible, and disappointment no longer feels like a personal failure, because the heart no longer measures success solely by results. The heart begins to see that some doors close not to punish but to redirect, that some delays exist not to harm but to prepare, and that some unanswered prayers are not ignored but reserved for a time when they will bring greater good. This does not mean that pain disappears or that waiting becomes easy, but it means that pain no longer feels meaningless and waiting no longer feels like abandonment, because the heart understands that it is being guided even when it cannot see the full path. At this turning point, the heart stops rushing life and starts walking through it, understanding that haste often blinds judgment, while patience sharpens wisdom, and that calm decisions are often better than quick reactions. The person who reaches this stage begins to notice subtle changes, not in the world around them, but within themselves. A steadiness during pressure, a pause before reacting, and a growing ability to accept what cannot be changed without losing hope. This inner shift is not a sign that the test has ended, but a sign that the heart has matured, because maturity is not measured by how little one struggles, but by how wisely one responds to struggle. When the heart reaches this point, it no longer demands immediate answers, but trusts that clarity will come at the right time, and this trust allows the heart to conserve emotional energy instead of wasting it on constant worry. The heart begins to recognize that not every feeling needs to be acted upon, not every thought needs to be followed, and not every fear deserves attention. And this awareness brings a level of peace that was previously missing. This turning point changes how life is experienced, because the heart is no longer reacting from a place of fear, but responding from a place of faith. And that difference shapes every interaction, every decision, and every moment of patience. In this way, the reminder does not change life itself, but it changes the lens through which life is viewed. And when the lens changes, even the same circumstances feel different, lighter, and more manageable. This is the quiet power of understanding, because when the heart finally understands its role and its limits, it stops exhausting itself with control and begins to find rest in trust, and that rest becomes the foundation for everything that follows. How this understanding changes daily life? When this understanding settles into the heart, it does not remain a theory or a beautiful idea discussed in a lecture, but it begins to quietly influence daily life in very practical ways, shaping reactions, decisions, and even the way a person speaks, listens, and responds to others. The heart that once reacted quickly now pauses, not because it has become weak or indifferent, but because it has learned that not every situation requires an immediate emotional response, and that calm often leads to wiser outcomes than urgency ever could. Small inconveniences that once felt unbearable begin to feel manageable, not because life has suddenly become easier, but because the heart is no longer interpreting every difficulty as a threat to its worth, faith, or future. When plans change unexpectedly, the heart still feels disappointment, but it no longer collapses under it because it understands that flexibility is part of trust and that rigidity often increases pain rather than preventing it. In conversations, this understanding softens the tongue, making a person slower to speak in anger and quicker to remain silent when silence protects dignity, relationships, and peace, and this restraint itself becomes a form of wisdom. The heart also begins to recognize when it is being pulled into unnecessary worry, comparison, or overthinking, and instead of following every thought, it learns to step back, remembering that not every inner voice deserves attention. Daily responsibilities are still fulfilled with sincerity, but they are no longer carried with constant tension because the heart has separated effort from obsession, understanding that doing one's best does not require carrying the burden of outcomes at every moment. This shift also changes how a person views success and failure, because success is no longer measured only by visible results, but by integrity, patience, and the ability to remain grounded even when results are delayed or unseen. The heart becomes more forgiving, not because it forgets pain, but because it understands that holding on to resentment often harms the heart more than it harms the one who caused it. And letting go becomes an act of self-care rather than defeat. Even in moments of solitude, the heart feels less restless because it is no longer demanding constant reassurance from the world, having learned where to turn for grounding and stability. This understanding also brings balance, allowing a person to care deeply without being consumed, to strive sincerely without burning out, and to hope strongly without placing unrealistic expectations on themselves or others. Over time, people may notice that this individual seems calmer, more composed, and less reactive, not because life has stopped testing them, but because the heart has learned how to carry life without constantly bracing for impact. This is how true change appears, not as a dramatic transformation overnight, but as a steady shift in how the heart experiences ordinary days, making even difficult moments feel less overwhelming and more purposeful. And in this way, the reminder begins to live within the person, guiding them quietly through daily challenges, shaping their character, and strengthening their faith, one calm decision at a time. How this understanding builds patience during tests. When life places a person in situations they did not plan for, did not expect, and did not want, the heart is often tested more than the circumstances themselves, because uncertainty exposes what the heart truly relies on when comfort is removed. A heart that has learned this deeper understanding no longer sees tests as interruptions to life, but as part of the journey itself. And this shift alone changes how patience is experienced, turning it from something forced into something meaningful. Instead of constantly asking when the test will end, the heart begins to focus on how it should respond while the test continues. And this redirection saves the heart from the exhaustion of waiting with frustration rather than waiting with purpose. Patience in this sense is not passive endurance or silent suffering, but an active state of trust where the heart remains steady, continues to do what is right, and resists the urge to become bitter, resentful, or hopeless during delay. Many people believe patience means feeling calm all the time. Yet true patience often exists alongside discomfort, unanswered questions, and emotional struggle, but it prevents those struggles from hardening the heart or pulling it away from faith. When a heart understands that every test carries wisdom, even if that wisdom is not immediately visible, it stops fighting reality and starts moving through it with greater dignity, accepting that not every lesson is meant to be easy. This patience protects the heart from making decisions rooted in panic, from speaking words that create regret, and from choosing shortcuts that may bring temporary relief but long-term harm. The heart becomes more thoughtful, more measured, and more reflective, because it recognizes that rushing relief often delays it, while calm endurance often brings outcomes that are far better than expected. Even when the test feels long, the heart learns to divide it into manageable moments, focusing on doing what is right today without being overwhelmed by tomorrow, and this approach alone preserves emotional strength. Patience also changes how a person views time, because instead of seeing waiting as wasted life, the heart begins to see waiting as preparation, growth, and refinement, shaping character in ways ease never could. Through this understanding, patience becomes less about suppressing pain and more about trusting that pain will not be permanent, and that endurance today is building strength for what comes next. The heart that practices patience in this way does not emerge untouched by trials, but it emerges wiser, calmer, and more resilient, having learned how to remain grounded even when answers are delayed. This is why patience is described as a light for the believer, because it illuminates the path during dark moments, not by removing the darkness, but by preventing the heart from losing its direction. And when patience is rooted in understanding rather than pressure, the heart remains soft, hopeful, and connected, even while carrying burdens that once felt impossible to bear. When the heart finally learns how to live, as this understanding settles deeply within the heart, a quiet transformation begins to take place, one that may not be visible to others, but is deeply felt by the person experiencing it, because the heart no longer approaches life with the same fear, tension, or desperation it once carried. The heart begins to realize that life was never meant to be controlled completely, nor was it meant to be carried alone, and that much of its exhaustion came not from hardship itself, but from the constant struggle to manage outcomes that were never fully within human hands. With this realization, the heart slowly releases its grip on anxiety, learning that it can still plan, strive, and work sincerely without allowing worry to dominate every thought, every emotion, and every expectation. This does not mean that challenges disappear, nor does it mean that pain is no longer felt, but it means that pain no longer defines the heart and difficulty no longer steals its sense of purpose, because the heart has learned how to remain anchored even while life continues to test it. The heart also becomes more compassionate, both toward others and toward itself, understanding that everyone is carrying unseen struggles, and that kindness, patience, and restraint are often more powerful than argument, judgment, or reaction. Moments that once caused panic now invite reflection. Situations that once created anger now encourage pause, and delays that once felt unbearable now carry lessons that the heart is willing to receive, even if understanding takes time. This is the stage where the heart stops measuring life only by success and failure and begins to measure it by growth, sincerity, and the ability to remain upright even when the road feels uneven. The heart learns that falling does not mean the journey has ended, that weakness does not cancel faith, and that every sincere return is valued, no matter how many times it is needed. With this maturity, the heart no longer rushes life, no longer envies others' paths, and no longer demands immediate answers, because it has accepted that every journey unfolds at its own pace, guided by wisdom beyond human sight. This acceptance brings a calm confidence, not the kind that is loud or proud, but the kind that allows a person to face uncertainty without fear, to continue forward without bitterness, and to wait without losing hope. The heart that reaches this stage has not become untouched by hardship, but refined by it, having learned that true strength is not found in avoiding struggle, but in responding to it with trust, patience, and dignity. And so, life may continue to change, challenges may still appear, and questions may remain unanswered, yet the heart now knows where to turn, how to rest, and when to trust, and that knowledge alone makes the journey lighter. This is how the reminder completes its work, not by changing the world around the heart, but by changing the heart itself, allowing it to live more peacefully, more faithfully, and more meaningfully, one day at a time. My dear brothers and sisters, life will continue to place us in situations we did not expect and paths we did not choose. Yet what truly shapes our journey is not what happens to us, but how the heart learns to respond to it with understanding, patience, and trust. This reminder was never meant to remove every difficulty or answer every question, but to gently realign the heart so it no longer carries life with fear and resistance, but with humility and confidence that it is being guided even when the way forward is not completely clear. If you leave this gathering with one thought, let it be this: that peace is not found in perfect circumstances, but in a heart that knows where to turn when circumstances are imperfect, and that knowledge alone can transform how life is experienced. Carry this understanding with you into your days, into your decisions, and into your moments of waiting, and allow it to soften how you view delays, challenges, and unanswered questions. May this reminder stay with you beyond these words, quietly strengthening your heart, shaping your character, and helping you walk through life with steadiness, patience, and hope. Sometimes a single reminder does not change the world around us, but it changes the heart within us. And when the heart changes, everything else begins to feel lighter.